I want to introduce you to our remote config tools today. So we've been doing a lot of work in this area, and this is the main motivation, is that it takes, when you build an app, it takes a number of weeks to release in the App Store. You're going to have a beta or an alpha test group, and you want to roll out features, you want to test things, you want to switch things on and off. And so we want to give you a way to do that, give you feedback cycles without you having to submit a new build. So this remote config can fit into all these stages, but I'd say mainly the last three. When you're testing your game, you want to, you'll have a group of testers, and you want to enable certain features for some of them, get some analytics back, make changes on the fly. When you deploy, you want to have your Christmas special or some event, and you want to be able to switch things on and off in your app. And you also then want to, say, do A/B tests in your game as well to say what's effective, what's really kind of working for users here. So using remote config, say, in combination with analytics. So part of how we want you to think about this and how we want the problems we want to solve is we don't want you to have to ask your developer to make a change every time you would like to add a new feature, and we definitely don't want you to wait to deploy every time you would like a new feature. So we'd like to have designers, maybe people who aren't Unity experts, make changes and not have to wait for those changes to come through. So we'd like to encourage you to think about your game in a modular fashion. So think about the assets you have and your data, which is maybe your configuration about certain events you're running, difficulty settings, that sort of stuff. And also the logic of the game. When your rules of how you play and how you win and how you move from stage to stage, keeping those things separate are going to help you fit in with the kind of this remote config idea much more easily. And you can do things like this. So because you can switch anything on and off at any time, you could do, you could kill switch a game if it's reached the end of its life cycle. You can turn on features for different parts of the world. You can, instead of, when you have a new feature, instead of publishing to the App Store and then everyone's got that straight away, you could then roll that out over time and start to catch some of those early issues that you have with most games when you release them, where things don't work quite as you expect them, or you want to like to do some testing first as you roll out. It means you can stage your rollouts as well. So I'd like to give you a demo of this. Let's see this in action. So what I have here is I have this awesome little clicky game, so I can move around. I can just click where I'm going to go. This is really a mobile level game. It's using object pooling, our new post-processing, and your render pipelines, Cinemachine, etc. So I can move around, and then I can click here and spawn an enemy. And when the enemy comes by, I can click the enemy and off it goes. The enemies can't kill me just because it's very hard to demo something when you keep dying. Right? So we're going to come here, we can spawn these enemies, and we'd like to work with this. We'd like to make some changes to this when it's live, out in the field. So how do we do this? How do we get started? Well, first thing you're going to need to do is to enable services. So you just switch those on, and then all you need to do is link your project with your organization. So once you've linked your project, you then have cloud services available to you. And then, of course, you go to Package Manager, where everything lives these days, and you're going to go and grab the remote config package. Now, note it's in preview, so it is still in active development. And here's the link here to the documentation where you can find out more about what's going on. I'll come back to the documentation later on. But let's have a look at an example of this. So I'm just going to show you this in action. I'm going to press play. And so as we remembered, I have one enemy being spawned, and it's a pretty dull sort of game. So I'm thinking, well, maybe I want to spawn some more enemies. So I'm going to go down to my remote config settings window down the bottom here. And I have something here which is spawn amount, and it's set to 1. So if I set that to 3, and I push these changes, then I can fetch the changes in my game, and now when I spawn an enemy, 3 enemies come out. So let me dig a little bit deeper into what the steps I just did and what that means. What I've done here in the editor is I've set up a whole bunch of parameters, and these just have arbitrary names. And when I add one, I have a choice of types. I can do a string, a bool, a float, an integer, or long, so I can specify the parameters up to me what I do. I can add any sort of parameter there. And then when I have made a change, I can click push, and that's going to upload it to my services console, ready for every game to start using. So that's pretty straightforward. We'll notice here I have a development clicked up the top here. So we have separate settings here for release and for development. So development's whenever I'm in the editor or when I've made a development build. So I can do some testing. I can have different settings for my beta testers who are on a development build maybe. Then on my release settings. So we're going to run in development today because I'm running in the editor. And I can go and make those changes. Now, so I've showed you how to make the change and then I've clicked push, which uploads those changes to the cloud. But what happens then when we pull them back down? How do we make them impact our game? If I have a look at this game here, it has a lot of manager objects here, and each of them are responsible for looking after graphics or audio or different parts of the game. What we're going to look at here is the remote configs manager, and it's just got this one class associated with it. So I'm going to show you the code that drives this. So if you're not a coder, it doesn't really matter. I just want you to get the principle, the idea of what this means when you're talking to a developer. So what we have here is, I have a config manager, and I say, when you've fetched some changes from our services, please call this function. And then I just request the changes. I request the config from the server. So, hey, please give me the data that's on the server currently. So when I click that fetch button in the game, it's going to download these things. And so I can do that any time. So this might be when I go in and out of a level, when I go to a menu for the first time, I can choose when I'd like to get changes. And then when I have those changes, it's really, there's three types of changes I can have. So it can tell me, hey, I'm going to give you the default config. So usually this is what happens on the first frame. When you start the game, we don't want to have to wait for us to go get data from a server somewhere and pull it back down. We want to start the game immediately. So often you're just going to get like, hey, just use the default for now. I can also get the cached. If I'm not connected to the net, for instance, when I'm playing the game, it's going to get whatever one I used last time. And then the last one is when we have the actual changes. This is the meaty bit, when we actually have the changes we've requested from the server. And then it's up to the application of what we do with this. It's up to you and your programmers what happens with those. So let's have a look at it. And here because we're using all these managers, they've just really used singletons to say, hey, please pass these settings on. So you'll see we have things like graphics settings, shadows, real time, for instance. These match to these settings in here. So all we do is we define some parameters in here. When the config comes down, we have some code here that says, what's the current value? Let's go change something in the game about that. It's fairly straightforward. And we make that happen. So what else do we have here? The other interesting thing that we have is we have, so I've showed you kind of the default settings, but you can also make these rule sets as well. So for instance, I have this winter event that I'd like to run. It makes sense to run it in Singapore, of course. So I've said here, please, if the country is SG, let's run this event. I can run it between these timeframes. So I could run this for a day or a week or a month. And then what's the rollout percentage? What percentage of users are going to get this rule? So I'm going to turn this one on. And then lastly, it's then what is what rule am I going to change? So in this instance, I'm just going to change the config value, and I'm going to turn snow on. So now I need to, because I've made a change, I need to push that change. And now when I press play, then I have the snow going. And so in this instance, this is a pro builder level, so we just have some different paint, some snow painted on the ground, and we have a particle effect that comes down. It's not impacting the characters, but hey, we've got a snow effect that can turn on. And I've still got my 3 enemies running around. I should turn that back down. But I think it's just to emphasize, I suppose, that this is, I'm going to keep kicking chords, that this is not about the editor, this is about users with a live game. I mean, I think we've all seen values change in the editor, and it makes sense. I can show you here on my phone, you probably won't be able to see it very well, but you can see that at least it's green at the moment. So I've got this same application running, this is deployed, user in the wild, I'm in Singapore, and I'm going to get some changes here, and now I'm in the snow level, right? So you can imagine using this to segment by country, to do A/B testing, all that sort of stuff. And you can have more than one rule. So I have the winter event here, but I can also then make up as many rules as I'd like. I'd like to change quality settings, perhaps based on the type of phone someone has. I'd like to change difficulty based on how long someone's been playing for, or what type of user they are, or anything that I'd like to make up. So for those rules, I'm just going to jump back to this code for a second. When I up the top here, when I said, hey, please fetch me the configs, please get me the data, what I can do is I can actually pass up, these aren't set here, these are just empty, but I can add my own data into this as well. So if I have someone who's a member of something, or I know they've played for a certain amount of hours, or they have an item in their inventory, or something like that, I can pass that data up, and I can then go and make a rule about that. So if someone has more than 100 coins, then they're going to have different conditions, and something different is going to happen for them. So that's one cool thing, is you can segment your audience like that. And then, of course, once I get the analytics back and I find out that's not working for that number of users, I don't have to make a new build. I can come back in here and tweak the difficulty levels or tweak the parameters, and then just push a new change. Great. And I just also wanted to show you, so this is if you're into the package manager, I showed you the documentation link. If you click on that, it's going to bring you here, which is gives you a lot of the details about how to set up your project. A lot of the stuff I've told you here, how to set up rules and settings. It has the full table of conditions you can have. So language, country, CPU, if you want to go that much, which OS they're using, and then of course your own custom ones. It shows you the code integration that I just showed you, how you can fetch configs and the sort of data you can push up as well. And then of course, as lastly, there's also a REST API as well. So you can create your own dashboard for this. You can go and interact with systems outside of Unity. Because remember, we want to open this up to designers, or maybe open this up to other people who don't have a Unity license or aren't Unity experts. So you could make your own little web page that has your settings and lets people tweak those settings directly from that, rather than having to go into the Unity editor. So the REST API is there, so you can go and push data and pull data and do all the stuff I've showed you via REST. And then there's a dashboard as well, so we can go and see on the Unity dashboard, you can go and see these rules and see what's been applied and what the conditions are, etc. So that's it in a nutshell. We have a way of changing data on the fly. Basically, it's a pretty straightforward concept, but it's going to lets you then work with your testers and work with your live audience more easily. So, does anyone have any questions? No? Okay, great. Thanks very much.